Welcome back, all you lovely people. I hope you enjoyed that little video from Stephen Colbert on truthiness. And I think truthiness is a pretty good way to introduce ourselves to the idea of ethical subjectivism. Now, again, I'll just repeat that, I keep repeating these. I just want you to know what they mean. Because part of the course is learning these new jargon and concepts so we can talk about them easier. So anyway. Ethical subjectivism. What is that? Ethical subjectivism is the meta-ethical claim that morality is a matter of individual acceptance because morality is solely determined by one's own personal reactions and feelings. So since subjectivism is saying it is about your individual, personal feelings about something, it is basically saying, go with your gut, just like we saw in the video from Colbert about listen to your gut. That's where you'll find moral truths. And I think I have a quote here from Ernest Hemingway, and I think this is a pretty nice also statement of ethical subjectivism, where Hemingway says here, so far about morals, I know only what is moral is what you feel good after, and what is immoral is what you feel bad after. And I think this does a really good job of capturing this very simple, basic idea of ethical subjectivism, that morality is doing what our feelings or our gut, our heart says it is. And that's all there is to ethics. There is nothing else. And again, we can connect this back up to the practical question of what ought I do? And when you're asked that question, moral subjectivism just says, ethical subjectivism. Well, good thing I'm using ethics and morals to mean the same. I'm sorry. Some people call it moral subjectivism. I flip-flop back and forth. Anyhow, so when you're asked the practical question, what ought I do? Ethical subjectivism says, go with your gut. Do whatever feels right. And that is, for you, the right thing to do. And we can now connect this back up to moral reasoning and justification. So suppose you make regular donations to the poor, and someone asks you, why do you give so much money to the poor? And if you're an ethical subjectivist, you would just say, well, it just feels right. It just feels like the right thing to do. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't do this. If I was greedy and selfish, I would feel terrible. I would just feel gross, couldn't sleep at night, feel guilty, whatever. But notice, all these are feelings, whether it's feelings of proudness or happiness or contentment at giving and donating, or whether it's worry about feelings of guilt if you didn't do it. But again, at the end of the day, you're doing it because it just feels right, and not doing it would feel so bad and so just ugh. And so again, that's all there is to justification and subjectivism. And as Hume will say, David Hume, the philosopher today, he does say, that's a fact. You either feel that way or you don't. There's not much to it. It's just an emotional response. Now, David Hume was, as I just said, a big fan of ethical subjectivism, very strong defense made of it. Indeed, I have many philosopher friends who read David Hume when they were your age, and they really are entranced, perhaps, by ethical subjectivism. And so we get in lots of fights about that. But anyway, David Hume himself is very blunt on this. Now, if you just turn to the page, what page is it? 289, we see a nice quote from David Hume on page 289 of the reading. This is where he says, "The hypothesis we embrace is plain. It maintains that morality is determined by sentiment." Now pause. He's olding, he's writing a couple hundred years ago, so his English is using words that we might not be familiar with. But sentiment, he is referring to first and foremost emotions, but also things like desire, inclination. So again, when he's talking about sentiments, just think about desire, inclination, and of course, emotional responses. That's what David Hume is saying here. So let's go back to the text. So he's saying, morality is determined by sentiment. It defines virtue to be whatever mental action or quality gives to a spectator the pleasing sentiment of approbation, and vice the contrary. So what is he saying there? The pleasing sense of approbation is that in your mind appears a happy feeling or a desire satisfied or an inclination met. So when you see someone doing something good, you just feel good. And that's all there is to a good action, is that it makes the spectator feel good, seeing it happen. That's what does he say? The pleasing sentiment of approbation. You approve, you feel good about it. And of course, vice, the bad things, you feel icky and gross and like, ugh, that's not good. That's guilty, whatever negative feelings emerge from that. And so that is a pretty straightforward statement by Hume there of ethical subjectivism. So now we can ask ourselves, like now you're learning, where good philosophers are trying to practice philosophy, because philosophy is an activity of argumentation and trying to assess things. So we can ask ourselves, what reasons does Hume give for the truth of ethical subjectivism? And I think he gives us 3 dependent reasons to accept ethical subjectivism. And again, these seem dependent because they need each other. If one of these turns out to be wrong, the argument probably collapses. And not that I'm going to attack this argument directly, but I just want you to have a sense about what's going on here. So again, I think Hume's going to give us 3 main reasons, 3 premises for accepting the truth of his position, and it looks like they're dependent. They all need each other in order to justify ethical subjectivism. And now, first, Hume says very early on a claim that I've actually been saying a lot in this class so far. So what Hume says here is that, the second page, philosophy is commonly divided into speculative and practical. Now, by speculative, he's just meaning, contemplation, thinking about, I wonder what this might be. But then he's saying practical. And as we'll see in a moment, he's using practical the way I'm using practical. That is geared towards action. So he's saying philosophy is commonly divided into speculative and practical. So we have the parts of philosophy that are doing thinking and contemplating, the truths of the world, shall we say. And then we have the philosophy that is practical, that is geared towards action. And as Hume goes on, as morality is commonly apprehended under the latter division, 'tis supposed to influence our passions and actions and to go beyond the calm and indolent judgments of the understanding. And so what we're seeing Hume say, this is his first premise, that morality is about action, not contemplation. And I've been saying this a lot in this class, right? Again, this shouldn't surprise us. I've been saying all along, ethics is practical. Practical, that means it's about action. And if we want to get kind of creative or, sound cool, we can say ethics is about strategy. It's about plotting a way about what we're doing and why we're doing it. That's ethics. So it's not speculative contemplation of like math, it's about actually doing something. So maybe the analogy is math is about, adding, whatever math is. I've been a long time since I took a math course. But then take like engineering, which is about action, building stuff. It takes the math, but then uses it to get stuff done. So that's like ethics. Ethics is about getting stuff done, getting your life done. Is it rude to point? Stop that. And now, so that's the first premise. Again, the first premise being morality is about action, not contemplation. And now if we keep reading on that same exact page we were just on, go into the next paragraph, I believe, he says a pretty dense little passage there that's going to give us the other 2 premises. So let's look at this. He says, since morals, therefore, have an influence on the actions and affections, again, because morality is practical, so it has an influence on the actions and affections, it follows that they cannot be derived from reason. And that because reason alone, as we have already proved, I'll come back to this in a moment, as we've already proved, can never have any such influence. Morals excite the passions and produce or prevent actions. Reason of itself is utterly impotent in this particular. Now, this is a pretty complex argument about the role of the sentiments, the emotions, and the role of reason. Because he's saying clearly here in this passage, he wants to establish that reason really doesn't help us directly with ethics. It'll have a role to play, as I'll say in a moment. But really, when you get to the heart of ethics, you find the heart. It's sentiments, emotions, passions. And so let's break this down into the 2 other premises of Hume's argument. Now, the second premise says, what does it say? It says, desire, inclination, and emotional responses ultimately motivate and drive all our actions. So these sentiments, again, sentiments being desire, inclination, emotional responses, these are what ultimately drive us, says Hume. Hume is saying they tell us what goals we ought to pursue. What is it that we care about? What is it that we want? What do we need? What do we want to achieve? He says, ultimately, when it comes to the ends of life, our goals, our purposes, the things we're trying to accomplish, It's our desires, our inclinations, our emotions that tell us what it is we want and what we want to avoid, right? The positive emotions tell us what to go towards. The negative emotions tell us what to avoid. Now, in Hume's writing, though, he does mention that desire and inclination and emotion, these sentiments, they do need help. And I'll explain this by bringing up the third premise and then tying it all together. So the third premise of Hume's the third and final premise, in fact, of this argument for ethical subjectivism is that reason tells us which actions will lead to which results, but reason cannot tell us which results we should pursue. And so in other words, what Hume is saying is that reason is purely instrumental. It's an instrument of our emotions and our desires. And what do I mean by that? It means that, well, we've seen already, emotion, desire, inclination, the passions, the sentiments, they set up the goals, the things we want to achieve. But it's reason that tells us what we need to do to achieve those goals. Our passions alone don't really tell us what to do. They tell us what we want and where we would like to be, but it doesn't tell us how to get there. It's like me saying, oh, go to this place. That's the emotion telling you where you want to be, but without Google Maps, you probably can't get there. And so like reason is like the Google Maps. It tells us how to get from where we currently are, what actions we need to actually do to get there. But notice, it is desire and inclination that drive the actions. It sets the goal, the end point. It's reason that acts as the Google Maps that tells us how to get there. It tells us the means to achieve our goal, the actions that will achieve the ends that we value. But again, the valuing comes from the emotions. The reasons is the instrument, the way that gets us there. So again, goals are not determined by reason. That's desire. The way to get to the goals, the method, the instrument, that's reason's job. And just to give an example, I mean, think about a baby. You know, baby has desires, baby has inclinations. Why am I calling it baby and not the baby? Well, I'm going to call it's a baby named Baby. If you watch Jane the Virgin, you know what I'm talking about.
Baby Michaelina de la Vega Factor.
I like that show. I'm sad it's canceled. Anyway, baby has desire. Baby has inclination. Baby has emotional responses. Baby want food. Baby want hugs. Baby want a clean diaper. You know, baby wants all sorts of things. But baby lack reason. Baby not rational yet. Baby too baby to have reason. And so baby can't do these things on its own. Baby can't just walk to the fridge and make a snack. Baby can't just use the toilet and not have to wear diapers. No. That's why we have parents to do these things. But of course, when you become an adult, that's when we finally have developed our rational capacities. And so when I'm hungry, and I'm probably hungry too often, as you can tell by I think I'm sitting down. You can't really see how this baby needs a diet. But anyway, food just tastes good. What can I say? So when I'm hungry, I get sidetracked easily. Food just, now I'm hungry. Anyway, when I'm hungry, reason just says, oh, hey, let's go to the fridge, see what we got there. And I'll probably skip it all and then grab a bag of Cheetos and eat that because Cheetos, especially the spicy kind, are delicious. But reason is what told me how to do it. Reason didn't tell me whether I was hungry or not. That's my desire. My inclination says, oh, I could use something to eat. And then reason's like, oh, okay, I'll help. Reason helps. Desire sets the goals. Desire is like the manager. And reason is like the employee that goes and does all the stuff. So my reason doesn't tell me I'm hungry or what I desire. My reason just waits for my desire to tell me, and then reason says, okay, I'll help you get that stuff. So reason kicks in to support the desires that way. And so Hume says the exact same thing applies to morality. Reason alone cannot tell you that murder is right or whether it's wrong. I mean, reason can tell you that, well, look, if murdering someone would make you feel good, reason can say, okay, we can buy a gun, we can buy, whatever it is you need to do to carry out that. Don't murder anyone, please. I hope your reason isn't saying that. But of course, if you don't want to murder someone, reason can help you there too. Reason can say, well, maybe we could talk to them or we could find another way to sort this problem out. But again, it's based on desires. And indeed, when someone's in a murderous rage, that's where their emotions just, boom, kick in and tell them, this is what we're doing here. It's the emotions, and reason's just always along for the ride, according to Hume. It's, reason's in the seat saying, oh, turn here, do this. But it doesn't tell us where we should be going as the goal. It just tells us how to get there. So Hume is saying, yeah, reason can't tell us whether murder is right or wrong. Only reason can do is tell us what to do about it. But it's our desires, inclinations, and emotions that tell us that murder is wrong. And indeed, this is exactly a nice summary, and I'll read it in full now. It's a bit of a long passage going across 2 pages, but it starts at the bottom of page 468. This is where he talks about the example of willful murder. So let's go to page 468. He says, take any action allowed to be vicious, willful murder, for instance. Examine it in all lights and see if you can find that matter of fact or real existence, which you call vice, in which every way you take it, you find only certain passions, motives, volitions, and thoughts. Excuse me. There is no matter of fact in the case. So what he's saying so far is that if you try to contemplate willful murder purely reasonably, look, you'll see, like, say, the bullet left the gun and went into the person's head, and they no longer are living because of that. And it can, you can describe what happened, but it can't tell us reason alone. It just can list out these facts. So-and-so pulled the trigger, the bullet left the gun and entered the person's head, but it can't tell us whether that was willful murder or perhaps maybe that was justice because, there was a crime that had to be rectified. That person was in self-defense. I don't know, it could be a million different things about why it might be okay to shoot someone. But either way, he says reason alone won't tell us whether it was right or wrong, whether it was justified or unjustified homicide. So that's why he says there's no matter of fact in the case. The vice entirely escapes you as long as you consider the object. Again, as long as you're being rational, trying to figure out what's the fact here. He says, no, you'll never find it until you turn your reflection into your own breast and find a sentiment of disapprobation, again, of dislike, of disapproval, which arises in you towards this action. Here is a matter of fact, but 'tis the object of feeling, not of reason. So again, he's saying, just what we've been saying is that there is nothing that you could, like a scientist who operates solely on reason, let's say, could never tell us whether this action was right or wrong, whether it was murder or justified. But it's our emotions that tell us. We feel anger, upset, a bad feeling at this act that causes us to call it murder and a crime and immoral. And we see a second example. If you turn to page 287, we see another example. I won't read it all this time, but Hume says, examine the crime of ingratitude, for instance. So ingratitude is just, it's just what he means. It's like if you help someone out and they don't say thank you. that's a lesser crime, not willful. He goes from willful murder to the extreme one to a lesser crime of ingratitude, not saying thank you or being appreciative when you've been helped. We can talk about whether ingratitude's a crime. It's I would say, tip and thank your waitress, please. And tip and thank your barman, whoever, right? These people, be thankful, be gratitude, be gracious. But again, he's talking about the crime of ingratitude. And he goes on to say, examine by your reason alone and what constitutes the demerit or blame. You will never come to any issue or conclusions. Again, he's saying if you're trying to go about it through reason, it's hard to understand what the problem is with ingratitude, right? Reason alone just says, well, you didn't say thank you. That's all reason can tell us, what happened. It's being descriptive. Hume is really thinking reason is pretty much descriptive in these cases. And so if you want the normative, the evaluation, the ought, he says, instead, the crime of gratitude resides in the mind of the person who is ungrateful. He must therefore feel it and be conscious of it. But nothing is there except the passion of ill will or absolute indifference. Again, he's going back. It's all about sentiment. If you want to understand why ingratitude is wrong, it's going to be about the feelings of the people involved and nothing more. Reason cannot help us. If you feel good being gracious, reason will give you ideas about how to be gracious. Like reason will say, hey, you should say thank you. Or reason would say, oh, you want to be gracious? Well, leave a tip, whatever. Reason will tell the passions how to get what the passions want. And so now we can put this all together into Hume's argument for ethical subjectivism. It's a pretty clever little argument. He says, 1, morality is about action, not contemplation. Again, that's why we've seen ethics is practical. That's number 1. Number 2, desire, inclination, and emotional responses ultimately motivate and drive all of our actions. So again, he's saying that's if ethics is about action, we need to talk about the passions because the passions are the things that actually drive us, cause us to do something. And third, reason tells us which actions will lead to which results, but it cannot tell us which results we should pursue. So what 3 is doing is saying, so 1, ethics is about action. 2, passions, emotions, sentiments, those drive our actions. 3, reason alone does not drive our actions. Passions, emotions, sentiment, that's in the driver's seat. Reason is the one giving the directions for how to get there, but it's the emotions that drive us to actually follow those directions. Because man, you're trying to get to that place and reason's there helping you get there. That's it. So we're listening to reason because reason's getting us to where our desires want us to be. But look, if your desire changes and you no longer want to go there, reason says, okay, tell me where we're going instead. And my wife is like this. We're going out. I wish she was here, though. I miss this about her. It's when you really love someone, you'll find that even the things that drive you crazy, you just love because it's who they are. And oh my God, I'm sorry. I'm going to stop. We're talking about emotion, though, and I really miss my wife today. It's a gray day outside, and I really miss her. Anyway, my wife, though, drives me crazy because, we're going somewhere, and I'm usually the navigator. If we were ever on Amazing Race... My wife, she loves The Amazing Race. And she says, if we're ever on The Amazing Race, I'm going to be in the passenger seat giving the directions, and she'll be the driver because she's really good at driving. She's really good. She's really brave. I love her. Anyway, but she does me crazy. It's like we're going one place. I'm like, okay, turn here. She's like, well, wait a minute. You know what? I'm feeling like we should get Italian tonight instead of burgers or whatever. And I'm like, oh, okay, fine. Recalculate directions here. But that's me. I'm being like, is this sexist? Well, she's driving. That means I don't know. Either way, she's like got the desire. She's playing the role of the desire here of what she wants to eat. And that's cool. And I'm acting as reason trying to help us get there by putting in the instructions and then reading them off to my wife. But again, if the desire changes, we're going somewhere else to eat. And reason just resets Google Maps and tells us how to get there. So again, that's a very silly way of put, I'll stick to it, of Hume's argument for ethical egoism. And I'll just conclude by saying, now this argument was really shocking in Hume's time. Hume knew people would not like this. Indeed, one of the bishops of the time was scandalized and said, this philosophy will lead to, anarchy and people just murdering and raping each other and all sorts of terrible things. This is awful. And that's why, incidentally, Hume did not publish this. Well, he was dead. He had instructions for this work to be published after he died because he knew he didn't want to deal with it. But Hume was aware that this would be the problem. And here's how just Hume gets around that problem of it being anarchy and crazy and rape and murder and nothing else if you're just doing what feels right. Because what Hume says, is that don't worry. Hume says, don't worry. It's not going to be
human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. Enough, I get the point.
Anyway, Ghostbusters. No, Hume says it's not going to be about that. That's not going to happen because he says people have psychological regularities when it comes to our emotions. That is to say, most people tend to find the same sorts of things agreeable and the same sorts of things disagreeable. And so that means that most people would just have disgust at the thought of murdering and raping innocent people. Most people will just say, that's gross. We shouldn't be doing that. And so yeah, only the mentally ill would get pleasure from raping and murdering others. So Hume says, look, we're going to see widespread agreement on morality because people just tend to like the same sorts of stuff. And so we don't have to worry about everyone murdering and raping each other because most people are just going to be like, that's gross. We shouldn't be doing that. But still, morality is ultimately based on emotions, according to this account. And that's all there is to it, according to Hume. Whew, I know some heavy stuff there. Pretty interesting. So we can take a break, stretch the legs out a little bit, your neck, and we'll come back and wrap this up by looking at Rachel's argument against ethical subjectivism. And as we'll see, it's a very similar, not the same strategy, but a similar strategy to what we saw going on with their critique of cultural relativism. All right. Well, anyway, see you back here in a moment.